At issue this week, a battle over the Canada Pension Plan. Alberta is proposing pulling out to create its own. The Prime Minister says the harm that would cause is undeniable. The Premier said Justin Trudeau's tone is inappropriate.
I think we should allow for the process to play out, let Albertans decide.
Why does Alberta want out, and why is the Prime Minister on the offensive? Hi there, I'm Rosemary Barton, here to break it down this week. Chantal Hebert, Andrew Coyne and Althia Raj. Good to see you all. Andrew, why don't you start us off this week about, I guess, not only the response from Alberta, but the kind of extraordinary open letter that the Prime Minister felt he wanted to write to the Premier and I think to all of Alberta.
Yeah, it's an extraordinary response to extraordinary developments, I guess. I mean, this is not every day that a province at least starts the process of maybe pulling out of the Canada Pension Plan. We'll see whether it ever comes to fruition. But the implications for Albertans are profound, and the implications for people in the rest of Canada are profound. The story that the government of Alberta likes to spin is that somehow the CPP, like everything else, is unfair to Alberta because, you know, they don't pay as much, they don't get as much in benefits, and they don't pay as much, or they pay more in contributions, but they don't pay they pay the same rate of contribution and they get the same rate of benefits. The only reason it's different in the aggregate is they have a younger than average population. So I think impelled more by symbolism and just general resentment is behind this process rather than an actual calculation of costs and benefits. They certainly have a long way to go to persuade Albertans themselves that this is a good idea. Yeah. But if they do pull out, and if they get anything like the amount of the assets that they'd like to pull out of the kitty, then it implies much higher contribution rates and possibly lower benefits for people in the rest of the country. So the Prime Minister has every right at least to point this out. Yeah. And as I say, if they do get into pushing and shoving over how much Alberta gets of the assets, I think the government of Alberta may be in for a rude awakening about what they actually emerge with in the end.
Chantal, the Prime Minister's letter did read as a little bit scary. I mean, and maybe that was the goal, to have people sort of do a double take and think, oh, is this whole thing going to collapse if Alberta goes ahead and does this?
Up to a point, I found that the letter was, in fact, quite aggressive. I don't remember, and maybe it's my memory that's failing, I don't remember Prime Ministers sending letters like that to premiers, ever. Did Pierre Trudeau send letters to René Lévesque when he wanted to do a referendum? Did Justin Trudeau write a letter to Premier Ford when he wanted to use the notwithstanding clause? I think, and Alberta can, if it wants to, withdraw from the CPP. What it cannot do is dictate the terms upon which it withdraws. And at this point, the government of Alberta is selling this to Albertans on the basis of a report that says that it should be able to leave with more than half of what is in that kitty. Yeah. I'm sure that the Premier of Ontario has something to say about that. But I also saw the letter as something that was a bit more political. Yeah. I.e., it is meant to put Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre on the spot. Inevitably, at some point, someone is going to be asking Pierre Poilievre, if you're Prime Minister, do you agree that Alberta should leave the CPP, and do you agree that it should leave with 53% of the money? Yeah. And obviously that question and the answer to that question, the second part, can't be yes. Because if it's yes, voters in Ontario, BC, Atlantic Canada will probably have something to think about before they vote for Mr. Poilievre.
Althia?
Yeah, I see it the same way. I think I agree with Chantal. I don't remember the last time a Prime Minister wrote a letter like this to a Premier. I was thinking Justin Trudeau didn't do this when Jason Kenney was talking about his equalization referendum. Yeah. But what is interesting is that I think, one, it's a welcome distraction for the Liberal government at this time because things are not going swimmingly well in Ottawa. Two, you know, Danielle Smith did not campaign on this in the spring. There was no mention of this. It is deeply actually unpopular. Andrew was pointing that. The public opinion polls suggest Albertans don't even want this. And it goes to kind of like all the wedge issues that the Prime Minister wants to pick with Pierre Poilievre, that he would not stand up to Danielle Smith, that he would be risky, that he would put social services that Canadians depend on at risk. So all of these things help the Prime Minister kind of define Pierre Poilievre, and I think that's the reason the letter was published, because it's a communications document more than a public policy stance.
That's assuming that Poilievre agrees with this. I mean, that seems to me kind of risky.
We don't really know that yet, right? Because he hasn't said so.
Yeah. Andrew, on the politics.
I think it's perfectly fair to ask Mr. Poilievre what he feels about this, because anybody who aspires to be Prime Minister of the country has to be Prime Minister for all the country and not just part of it. I think we've had Prime Ministers of both parties who've been a little too conscious of their own home region and not governing for the country as a whole. But in this case, there's a happy consonance that part of the reason why Mr. Trudeau may feel like he's got some room to write stern letters to the Premier of Alberta is that, in fact, Albertans are not necessarily behind her. And in fact, not only did she not mention it or campaign on it last time, when asked about it, explicitly denied it, said no one's touching anybody's pensions. I think that's a fairly direct quote. So, you know, he's got some latitude here. You know, there's something awfully unseemly, it seems to me, with a collectively financed program like that, where you kind of come and go as you please, depending on their temporary advantage. And the trouble with that, of course, is that can come back to bite you. Part of the reason Quebec set up its own Quebec pension plan way back when was that at that time it had a younger than average population relative to the rest of the country. Well, 60 years later, that's no longer the case, which is one reason why Quebecers are paying a higher contribution rate than Canadians in the rest of Canada. So be careful what you wish for, I guess, is the lesson there.
Chantal, on that point, on how Quebec's, you know, does or doesn't work, depending.
To not revisit ancient history, Quebec did not leave the CPP.
No.
It did not come to the CPP when the CPP was created, for all kinds of other reasons having to do with economic development. But the experience in Quebec, and I can testify to it, I worked for most of my life in Ontario. Sure, when I moved to Quebec, I may have been paying higher contributions, but I am not getting less for all my years of working because I'm now a Quebec resident, which means that whatever you do, go your own way if you want to, but you're going to have to ensure portability. You cannot put people who work in Alberta in kind of a golden jail. They get these benefits, but what if they want to retire in some other region? So there are limits to how much change you actually bring to individuals by toying with this idea.
That's a really good point, because obviously lots of people who are in Alberta are from elsewhere, that they go there to work and then they leave. Last minute to you, Althia.
I want to flag that if Albertans decide in a referendum to do this, I think this will generate like kind of the constitutional talks of the late 2020s, because, you know, according to this formula, if Ontario withdrew its part, it would take all of the fund with it. So there will be a huge fight between provinces as well as the federal government to determine what is Alberta's just or fair piece of the pie, and that could be really nasty and ugly.
Okay, well, I probably won't sleep tonight after that, but we're going to take a little break, and when we return, we'll look at the state of the Liberal NDP deal.
We have a clear message that our members sent us. They said very clearly they believe in a Pharmacare that protects families, workers, Canadians.
Is the Liberal NDP deal in trouble over the promise of Pharmacare? That's next on The National. An ultimatum from NDP delegates to the Liberals: commit to a national Pharmacare plan or the party may pull its support.
We have now the leverage given to us by our convention and our members that say we need to keep on putting pressure on this government.
Is the Liberal NDP deal in jeopardy? Could it really trigger an election? Let's bring back at issue. Chantal, Andrew, and Althia. I'm just going to answer my own question there. No, I don't think so. But Althia, you go first. How real is this threat, I guess, from the NDP? And is the leverage that Jagmeet Singh claims that he has, is that something that you think he plans to use?
The threat is real. An election, I would not say, is imminent. Essentially, there's two things at play. One, New Democrats have been hearing on the doors, and the party knows this very well, that voters are blaming it for propping up a sinking ship that is the Liberal government. And they want to disentangle themselves as much as the Conservatives are trying to tangle them by calling this 8 years of NDP Liberal government, with the deals only been in place for 18 months. So it's not necessarily a bad thing that they want to disentangle with themselves, gives themselves a little bit of breathing room before the next election campaign. A lot of their members feel like the dental plan did not go far enough. This is not the type of social service plan that they would like to see. They basically, New Democrats want to see the Canada Health Act expanded to include things like dental care, medication, vision, and they want that to be a single-payer universal system, which is not what the dental care program is. It's a subsidy program for people who make a certain income threshold. And the Pharmacare bill that the Liberals put forward, that frankly they have always been telegraphing to us since Bill Morneau was finance minister, is a patchwork bill. It's if you don't have insurance, you could fall on the government's program. Yeah. It was okay for dental care, it seems, but now it's not enough for the NDP on Pharmacare. So they may, and I say may because we don't know what the Liberal plan will end up looking like, but we know that Chrystia Freeland has said there's no money in the kitty. They may not put forward what the NDP wants, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. The Bloc Québécois this week told us they're ready to vote for a patchwork bill as long as it comes with a whole whack of money for Quebec. Sure, no problem there. And they're willing to, Don Davies, the health critic, said this for the NDP, support the Liberals still on a case-by-case basis. May I just say, flag, there is one bill that they actually, I would say, care more about, that they don't talk about as much, is the anti-scab legislation. I do not see the Liberals, the NDP defeating the Liberals until that bill is passed.
But an important point that Althia raised there, Chantal, the government doesn't, I don't think, have the money for what the NDP is asking for, or at least that's not where it wants to put the money.
And there is also the political optics question. I believe that Justin Trudeau has a decision to make on this. The parliamentary budget officer says a plan along the lines that the NDP says it will only accept would cost governments, not just the federal government, $11 billion. First, you need to check with how many provinces want to buy into this initiative. The other parliamentary budget officer number is the deficit that we are looking at this point looks 15 to 17% higher than what was forecast in the last budget. So here's the choice for Justin Trudeau. Does he want to lock in time by keeping the deal alive with the NDP, but at the price of sacrificing whatever shreds of fiscal responsibility that the Liberals still have on their brand? To me, the answer is no. But I agree with Althia. If the NDP pulls out of this deal because it can't get the Pharmacare bill that its members want, the Bloc will continue on occasion to support the Liberals. So will the NDP. So it doesn't mean that we will have an election in March. But it does make the government's position more fragile, and the certainty that they can go to 2025, more dicey.
Yeah, it's a risk, I guess, or a gamble, because I think Chantal's point is a good one there, Andrew, that the government has to be seen to be managing the economy, because that is a serious vulnerability for them. Yeah,
I agree with my fellow panelists that it's unlikely to lead to an election anytime soon, but it may well result in the end of the Liberal NDP deal, because I think both sides are kind of dug in on this. It's very hard for either of them to concede. Certainly the Liberals cannot accept a single-payer plan, not only because of the cost, although I'll mention every time the Parliamentary Budget Office looks at this, the cost of the plan to governments goes up, and the resulting savings supposedly from having a monopoly purchaser go down. It's now down to just $1 billion in savings versus $11 billion net cost increase. So the economics of it look less and less attractive, but even more so the politics of it. If you're going to have a government takeover of the drug insurance plan, that means pushing everybody off of their existing private plans, which most Canadians are pretty happy with. And they're happy with them in part because they're more generous than any public plan is likely to be. So try... Well,
supposedly you could choose, I would think.
Well, not if it's a monopoly plan. So try selling that in an election. We're going to add $11 billion to spending, and you may not actually wind up with a better plan. You may actually end up with a worse plan. I think the Conservatives would make a meal of that. So no, the Liberals cannot accept this, and the NDP says they cannot accept anything less than that. Certainly when the Liberals are at 25 or 26% in the polls, you're going to be a little cockier if you're the NDP. in your willingness to kind of push the envelope on this.
So if the deal goes away, falls apart, however you want to characterize it, Althia, what happens to the NDP? I mean, so we've all agreed there probably won't be an election, but is that a problem for them if they don't have that agreement anymore?
No, we just go back to the way things were before the agreement. so it won't actually change that much. Like, you know, they will vote for the budget if it has a few trinkets that they like. They will vote with the Conservatives, because the Conservatives oppose almost everything the Liberals do, on things that they don't feel the Liberals go far enough on. We'll just go back to what life under a minority is supposed to be. So it's not really going to be that different. And, you know, I feel sometimes like New Democrats kind of forgot like there was another dance partner in the House of Commons, which is the Bloc Québécois, which actually has more seats than they do.
Yes, for sure.
And, you know, the Bloc is also looking for ways to distinguish itself. The Conservatives are running ads in the province saying that the Bloc Québécois basically is not standing up for Quebec. So if the leader can find an issue that proves that the Bloc Québécois has value and is bringing home the bacon, I'm sure he will not hesitate to do so.
Chantal.
And there is not in Quebec the same level of we're sick of Trudeau fever. So the Bloc at this point is mostly, when you look at what is happening on social media, is mostly campaigning against the Conservatives. The NDP overplayed its hand when it brought down Paul Martin over a healthcare issue in 2005, and its reward for that was a decade of Conservative rule with zero influence for the NDP. The NDP actually has more influence on policy in fourth place now than it did in official opposition in the face of a majority Conservative government. But I guess if you don't like to remember your history, you're bound to repeat it. And that's basically what the polls suggest. Look at the polls. Do they suggest that Mr. Singh will become Prime Minister in the next election? I didn't see that.
Andrew, 30 seconds to you.
I just would add a note of just not underestimating the degree of discontent within the NDP at where they're at right now. You know, Singh emerged with 81%, but that was reduced in the leadership race. And people, yes, are feeling like, you know, did I shave my legs for this? Is this what we went into government for, to get, you know, fobbed off with you know, incremental programs? They're in the mood for something bigger.
We have to take a short break, but when we return, we'll look at Quebec's decision to raise tuition for out-of-province students. That's next. Quebec is raising tuition fees for students from outside of the province. Premier François Legault is defending the move. Out-of-province students will see their tuition fees double next year. So how will raising tuition affect Quebec's ability to attract students? And will this hurt Quebec's post-secondary institutions that rely on, some of them anyway, rely on students from across Canada? Let's bring everybody back. Chantal, start us off here. It's a big increase, but we should say that Quebec's tuition fees are low, and that is sometimes why people go to Quebec and choose to go to university there.
Yes and no, in the sense that non-Quebec students are already paying higher fees than Quebec students.
Right.
So the issue is that suddenly those higher fees are being doubled.
Yeah.
And once they're being doubled, you are not any longer asking non-Quebec students to pay the Canadian average, the outside Quebec Canadian average. Yeah. You're basically saying we're going to make it really, really expensive for you to come to the three Anglo universities, Bishop, Concordia, and McGill. It looks very much like an improvised idea. Mm-hmm. The rationale for it that the Premier has offered is not convincing very many people. It is not convincing the Mayor of Montreal, Valérie Plante, who rightly pointed out that this will just diminish Montreal and, by ricochet, Quebec's image in the world. But what I find fascinating, to tell you the truth, is that this decision seems like another reversal a few weeks ago to stem from one single event, and that is a by-election loss by the CAQ, François Legault's party. And it matters to who? To the Parti Québécois. It feels to me like François Legault saw the ghost of the Parti Québécois and thought they could kill me. They're resuscitating, and he is scrambling in a way that is really hard to process when it comes to public policy to become more nationalist than he ever was. By and large, it looks more like improvisation than a serious move.
Well, I mean,
but it also looks like panic.
Yeah. I mean, he knows that, in case people forget, he was in the Parti Québécois before, and he knows that party well. So I don't know if he has something serious to be worried about here. Althia.
So I'm just going to disclose right off the bat that I sit on the board of trustees of the McGill Institute for the Study of Canada. It's a volunteer position, and also I did go to McGill as an out-of-province student. So
there you go. There you go.
I'm a little invested in this conversation. It is really interesting what Chantal says, because I think, one, it is so. Let's just put the numbers out there. It is it's $9,000 now a year, and it would be $17,000. That's like almost like a international student amount of money. It's a lot. Whereas if you are an out-of-province student and you want to go to U of T and you have an arts degree, it's about $6,500. So it would be a huge disincentive for Canadians who want to live in Quebec and maybe want to learn French and want to live about this other learn about this other province, to move there to go to school, because that is quite, unless you have pretty wealthy parents or somebody helping fund your tuition, that's a lot of money. So I think if Quebec intends to stay in the Federation and they want the rest of the country to know about its dynamics and to, love the French language and feel for that linguistic fight, this seems totally counterproductive to me. But if they are not interested in that, and to Chantal's point, if this is a sovereigntist move, then it makes a lot of sense.
Andrew.
Differential fees are not unknown in Quebec or in the rest of Canada, and it's partly because of the way in which we fund universities, where because students only pay a fraction of the full cost, at least at the undergraduate level, then they're basically a cost rather than a revenue center for the province that receives them, which is terrible. We ought to arrange things so that people are encouraged to go to different parts of the country, and we'd have a much more unified country perhaps if we did. But be that as it may, I think what's so shocking about this was, the amount, the suddenness, and the reason that was given for it by the Premier, which is that Anglo students from the rest of Canada are a, quote, threat to the survival of the French language. Whether that threat is because they stay afterwards and therefore pollute the air with their English language, or whether because they go home and they don't contribute, but it's either way, the message that was sent was, we really don't want you coming here. I think the most heartening part of all this has been the response in Quebec, including among Francophones, who I think quite rightly say this makes the province look parochial and closed-minded and insular and all those things that it really ought to be trying to get away from. So, yeah, it may be that Legault has to go to the Anglo-bashing playbook to keep pace with the PQ, but it's not winning many favors outside that circle.
Last thought to you there, Chantal.
The PQ has 4 seats, and one by-election win was enough for Premier Legault to suddenly feel that he needed to shore up his credentials, which tells you a lot about his sense that he was bulletproof until that by-election. But I worry, he reversed a major decision that he'd reversed himself on transit in Quebec City 2 days after the by-election. Now he's doing this, and at some point you say, well, are you a reasonable person that does public policy? Or are you just someone who panics on the basis of the loss of one by-election? Or PQ members that allows them, someone pointed out, and they have done it, to get you the family package at Saint-Hubert if you're looking for chicken. But
and who isn't, frankly? Okay, we're going to leave it there. Thank you all. Appreciate it. And that is that issue for this week. Don't forget, you can catch The National on YouTube and CBC Gem. I'm Rosemary Barton. Thanks so much for watching. See you back here next week, if not before.